Join us for lively discussion about the A-State community. Each week, we'll meet with a variety of faculty, staff, and students to discuss all things Arkansas State University. Live from the ASU-TV studios in the School of Media and Journalism, this is A-State Connections. And hello, everyone. Welcome to A-State Connections on ASU-TV. I'm Johnathan Reaves, an academic advisor at Arkansas State. Well, at Arkansas State University, the Dr. Joel Gambill Distinguished Speaker Series takes place as it features professionals in media talking to students in the School of Media and Journalism. And today we have the next speaker in the series joining us here on ASU-TV. Kevin Turbeville is the sports editor of the Jonesboro Sun. And thanks for joining us. Welcome to A-State Connections.
Thank you for having me on the air, Johnathan. It's an honor to be here. It's been an honor to be back on campus.
So tell us how things have been going so far. You've been in the classroom talking to students. How's that been going so far?
It's been awesome. I've enjoyed visiting with students and answering their questions, telling them a little bit about myself and what I do and my time here at Arkansas State University as a student in the 1980s. Just a real thrill to be back on campus.
Tell us about, we talked a little bit yesterday in my office before we started talking about this, and it was pretty interesting. You had said that sports reporting originally wasn't something that you were really thinking about. So kind of tell us the story about how you got into journalism and eventually sports reporting.
Growing up, my dad would bring home 2 or 3 newspapers a day. We lived in central Arkansas. I would read the Arkansas Gazette, the Arkansas Democrat, and then the Pine Bluff Commercial. And, obviously that kind of drew me into newspapers starting off. And when I came here to Arkansas State in 1985, I spent the first couple of years taking general education requirements for the most part. And when I looked across the possible majors, journalism stood out as a really good combination of the things that I love. I'm into history, I'm into English. I enjoy those. Those were my best subjects, and it just was a natural fit for me. And so I enrolled in the journalism classes starting in the fall of 1987, and Dr. Gambill was actually my first journalism teacher. He taught me the first class I took over here, and when I found out, when they asked me to come back and speak in the Joel Gambill Speaker Series, I jumped at the opportunity because he was such a great mentor. Over the years, past even my time as a student, he's been such a great mentor. And he and other professors in the program. Yeah,
for people who may not know about Dr. Joel Gambill, kind of tell us about him and what he meant to you.
Oh, he was just such a professional, and he cares so much about his students, and was so wonderful at really at all aspects of it. At talking to you, helping you understand your subject matter. Giving you some advice, professional advice. Just really, it means a lot to me.
Yeah. And so you're sports editor. How long have you been doing the sports there at the Jonesboro Sun?
Well, actually, Dr. Gambill played a role in me starting at the Jonesboro Sun. At the time, in the 1980s, the Sun would have 3 or 4 ASU journalism students who would work part-time. And he recommended me to Charles Cromwell, the sports editor at the time, and I started working at the Sun in August 1988 as a 20 to 25 hour a week part-time sports writer. I would go out and cover games. I'd answer the phone call. Coaches around the area would call in their results, and I would do that. And in spring of '89, a full-time position opened, and Charlie asked me, about filling that. I jumped at the opportunity to become full-time, which included a few more responsibilities, certainly in terms of newspaper production and helping put the paper out at night. And that's when I started having opportunities to really cover ASU sports. The first ASU athletic event that I recall covering was a baseball game at the Old Kell Field in 1992 against Ole Miss. It was 1989, and at the Old Kell Field against Ole Miss. And got the chance to cover ASU athletics in that way, cover a lot of the high schools here. It's kind of funny, my freshman year, I was a walk-on football player in 1985. And as a sports writer at the Sun in 1989, I was interviewing some of my old teammates in the locker room after games. that was pretty fascinating. And then, I continued on in that role into 1993, and Charlie decided to leave the Sun. And that's when they told me, well, you're the sports editor. And I kind of looked at them like, I'm 26 years old at the time, and obviously it's a learning experience every day. And I've been blessed to be able to do that job, first for the Trout family, who owned the newspaper until 2000, and for Paxton Media Group, which has owned the newspaper since then.
So what was it like transferring or transitioning from being a sports reporter to sports editor? What was that like, and how did your responsibilities change in that regard?
Well, I went from being the guy taking orders to the guy who had to try to give them. And I managed our sports staff. Every week I would try to come up with a outline of a schedule for our entire staff, knowing that it was probably going to change during the week. And, obviously I had more of a role in covering Arkansas State University athletics. That was kind of the expectation at the time. And I covered was more than 100 consecutive ASU football games from like 93 to 2005 in person. And the first night when I sent somebody else to a football game at Oklahoma State in 2005, I almost didn't know what to do with myself. My son was 12 at the time, and we ended up playing with his Hot Wheels cars, past the time, and
right.
While I was listening to a little bit of the Indians and Oklahoma State.
Yeah. So for people who are interested in going into this field and sports reporting and all that, I know you've got an opportunity to talk to some students about that. What would you recommend people, do to be able to start getting their start in this business?
Well, I think what you're doing here is a great way for that, to professional training. I think we really need people to be trained to do what we do. Whether it's classes here and then working for the Herald or working for ASU-TV, I think that's a great way to get into it.
Yeah. So what are maybe your most challenging, is there one sport that's maybe a little bit more harder to cover than another? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. I try to do as much homework as I can before an event, and the more I can prepare, the better I feel. As far as writing a story on deadline, as long as the game doesn't run into extra innings, baseball is probably the easiest to write on deadline, again, provided it doesn't run over.
Sure.
But, kind of as far as writing a football story on deadline, sometimes trying to work in all the elements into what you're doing and not just run on and on and on can be a challenge, because there's so much information.
Are there sports that for you it was a little bit maybe harder for you to like? Everyone has like a favorite sport, right?
Right.
That like either football or baseball or basketball or whatever. Were there ones that you were just like, I'm not really interested in that, so I've got to try and figure out how to kind of push through to be able to do the reporting? Because I think even in journalism, there are some stories you're really excited to cover, and others that, and it doesn't have to be sports, it could be anything, and others that you're just like, you just got to find the motivation, to be able to do it.
One of the things that I've found over the years is, even if I'm not a personal fan of I don't keep up with the sport closely, when dealing with the people who are playing, it's really important to them. So I get drawn into it that way. Everything that you're covering is really important to the people you're covering, and I tend to get drawn into it that way, and that's been a good thing for me. And I've learned a lot about a lot of sports over the years that maybe I didn't grow up playing.
Yeah. If you have people who would just come up and say, "Yeah, I'd love to have my picture in the sun. I'd love to be able to be highlighted in the sun."
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I've had some of that. Yeah.
It's been like maybe with high school, like a lot of high school stuff, like, maybe football or whatever.
Well, when you're going to talk to me over here, hey, get my photo. I'll go to high school games now, and I'm shooting photos, and I'll have a lens that reaches out on the field, and I have players who'll say, "Hey, snap me up, shoot my photo," and I'll shoot it, but I know that they're too close for me to even get them in focus,
Right.
And sometimes like a ball boy will ask me, "Hey, get my picture." You got it, and I always do that.
I think that, you can find the story, really good stories, about players and be able to kind of, or even, people who may not get a chance to play. Maybe they're managers, maybe they're others, but they're such vital parts of the team, and those stories can be so fascinating.
Yeah, usually when for instance, if I'm covering Arkansas State football over the years, I like to try to get different viewpoints on the team. Yes, you want to talk to the quarterback, and you need to talk to the quarterback a lot of times, but sometimes I wouldn't mind I'd like to talk to the offensive guard, or maybe the punter, just to get a different perspective on that.
Yeah. And how is it with for people who want to go into this, like when you're talking with coaches and all that? Is there kind of a set strategy to be able to do that and do it successfully?
It depends on the setting. So if you're talking to them between games, it's a little more relaxed. If you're catching a coach after a game, for example, a high school football game, usually I'll approach coaches on the field, and they're still wrapped up in what they're doing, and it's going to be a fairly short conversation, and we'll get right to the point. We'll be talking about the game. And if it's between games, a little more relaxed, might be a little longer conversation. So, and at Arkansas State, obviously they have a weekly press conference with football. Basketball, I try to set up something with the coaches, between games if I can. I talked to Coach Silva before the baseball series last week. We had some time to visit a couple of days before the series. Those are enjoyable opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's so much of a wide variety. You've got high school, you've got A-State, you've got all these different things. How do you all keep it, in check and be able to you got to prioritize your coverage, right? How do you work on that prioritization and being able to say, okay, this is what we're going to cover. We've got so much that we could cover, but we're going to focus on those areas. How do you make those decisions?
Well, part of it is depending on newspaper circulation. Where are the readers, and what are the readers most interested in? And that's kind of what I have to go by, is what are most of the readers interested in. We did a reader survey, and it's been a few years now, but a lot of when we've checked and looked into what interested readers, we found ASU sports were really high across the board for us. We found high school sports were high across the board for us, and I've still kept that in mind when making some of those decisions. Yeah,
and then also trying to keep up with playoff games and those kinds of things too. That's always fun, but also a separate bit of challenges, I guess.
It is really a challenge, and sometimes, when a high school team, for example, goes on the road, I've tracked many of them down when they're on their way back from a game, from somewhere across the state.
Yeah, exactly. Just try and grab that interview.
And you really get to where, it's the basic who, what, where, when, why, and how. Over the years with so many of those phone calls, I've developed a way of getting the information I need, and just sometimes pulling it out of people,
Yeah, exactly, that's right. We're going to continue on with our conversation on the other side of the break. Sports editor of the Jonesboro Sun, Kevin Turbeville, joins us here on A-State Connections. We'll be right back with more A-State Connections right after this.
Students should watch ASU-TV just to see the creativity that a college student can get. The creativity that some of these students have is truly amazing. Getting that experience can really just take you further, and I feel like our program does that for a lot of students.
I think one of the things I learned at Arkansas State was life is 10% of what happens to you, 90% of how you respond to it, and that's just something that I live by.
A-State is home, and they're going to treat you like you're a part of the family.
Red Wolf Radio is a student-led organization at Arkansas State University wanting to hear your takes on pop culture, music, the news, and college life. Just about anything you can think of. Located in the Education and Communications building on campus, we are always looking for more volunteers. So if you're an Arkansas State University student, no matter the major, and this is something that interests you, shoot us an email at redwolfradio@astate.edu. That's redwolfradio@astate.edu. Let them hear you howl.
Live from the ASU-TV studios in the School of Media and Journalism, this is A-State Connections. And welcome back to A-State Connections on ASU-TV. I'm Johnathan Reaves. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. Joel Gambill, distinguished speaker Kevin Turbeville, who's the sports editor of the Jonesboro Sun. And thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here on A-State Connections.
I'm enjoying it. Thank you for having me.
Well, and I know that one of the things that you, we were also talking about this off air, is that you enjoy working with other media. Of course, you have to work with other media when you're in this. Sometimes they're at other papers and there are other media and all that, but kind of tell us about that. I know you usually a lot of close friendships and a lot of things kind of develop, and sometimes tips and other things can kind of come out of those things while we're working with other media organizations.
Oh yeah, I really enjoy meeting different people when they come in here, whether they're covering the Red Wolves or they're covering a high school team. That's something I enjoy. I've over the years I've tried to become more outgoing about doing it too. Just to make sure I greet people and get to know people. I'm on the air an hour a week on radio on the Ticket on from 9 to 10 with Bud Schropel and Randy Myers. Kay Carlton has me on his show usually about 5:15 on Thursday afternoon. So I try to spend time with on the air. Just part of it. I enjoy doing it, but also to promote the newspaper a little bit, to get the word out about what we're doing, and just to spend some time with those guys too.
I think the way the media landscape continues to change, it's like we need these collaborations. These collaborations are important, and especially if there's like a big story that you may not have individual resources, but if you collaborate and work together, there could be some really award-winning, outstanding pieces that would go on. And I know the Jonesboro Sun has been such a great establishment in the community for so many years, but kind of your thoughts on how the media landscape is changing and how you are able to maybe work on some collaborations and other things.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely changing in that regard. And I know in terms of what we do at the Sun, it's changing. Obviously we are a print product primarily, but we've also ventured into video in the last few months. And so multimedia journalism is certainly the way it's going to go.
Well, and one of the things too that is an advantage, people go on to like the Jonesboro Sun and they're able to look at that. Y'all can update stuff on the website.
We do
all the time.
Right, we do, and our print deadline during the day is in the afternoon because of production. The way the production process works. Mm-hmm. So, but I will update as I need to. I'll update our website through the day. Example. I have some high school softball scores from yesterday. They'll go on the website this afternoon or today at some point. Yeah. Once they're ready for print, then they'll go on the website as well, so people can see something like that before it's in print. Over the weekend, I covered ASU's football scrimmage Saturday. That was on the web Saturday night. The baseball game Sunday afternoon, I was on the web Sunday night rather, before it went in print. Tuesday.
And it's like with the Delta Digital News Service that I'm the faculty advisor for the Herald, which is there as well. It's a really good experience to be able to have because of that instant updating
right.
And that. So it really, I would think it serves more as like a complement to be able to have that to the coverage that you would have in print, to be able to, instead of it like battling each other, you can use that to help complement your coverage.
Oh, totally agree. That it certainly has to complement it. And one thing we've added in the last couple of years, while we don't have a print product on Sunday or Monday, we have our 4-page Sunday Extra that is online only on Sundays. And it'll have, during the school year, for sure it'll have high school football from Friday night so that people can read it earlier. And it goes online earlier than that, even on Saturdays. But it'll be online on Sunday in a print type form package on a page, and glad to have that as well.
I want to ask you about some of maybe your favorite stories that you've covered as being the sports editor. Kind of give us a couple of examples of your favorite stories that you've covered.
Well, I guess if you're looking at it from a standpoint of like a memorable postseason or a memorable achievement here, 1994, the baseball team won the Sun Belt Conference tournament and finished third in an NCAA regional tournament. You know, one of the teams that beat them in the NCAAs was the eventual national champion. So it was, and the games and the tournament was in Mobile, and it was one of those where the games, every game had a memorable twist to it. Two of them went to extra innings. The championship game went to extra innings, and they were just memorable games. And then they went to the regional at Austin, Texas, which was also a memorable experience. I've been fortunate to cover the games where the men's and women's basketball teams here have won to make their first NCAA tournament appearances. You know, 99, the men's team in Lafayette, Louisiana, and this year in Pensacola, Florida, the women's team. And what an incredible story that was.
Oh, yes.
Just an incredible story that women's team was this year.
Yeah.
You know, I've been to most of the bowl games, a lot of the bowl games the football teams played in. You know, when the Arkansas women's basketball team came here in the 2005 NIT, you know, the women's NIT, the game that drew 10,700, I think it was, packed the arena. That was a memorable experience. You know, I wasn't at the first game in the First National Bank Arena when Memphis State came here. I was off somewhere else that day, but I've seen a lot of games in the arena for sure.
Sports is just like news in that if you've got several things that are going on, like you might have a packed day of sports where you've got like several sports things. A-State may have 3 or 4 games a day.
Yeah.
There are other things that are going on. So obviously there was a lot of deadlines. It's tight, you know, deadlines, a lot of pressure. How do you deal with the high pressure situations and those tight deadlines?
Well, I think anybody, when you're on a deadline, your adrenaline starts flowing. Really, because you know it's there. I mean, I even if there's not a clock nearby, it's like I can hear it ticking. You know? I think I can hear this. I'm
glad you said that. Yes.
I think I could hear the sand going through an hourglass. that sort of pressure.
Yeah.
When I'm writing on deadline, I try to keep it as simple as I can and try to get the basics of the story. And if something creative comes to me in that moment, that's great. If not, I try to keep it simple, because you know a good story finished before on time is better than a great one that's too late to do anything with.
Exactly, that's a good point. We were talking about the hour, you know, and the glass. I was here thinking about that one soap opera, you know, and that. But I would call it sometimes for how news would be in that as the stomach turns. Because sometimes it can cause that. It can cause the stomach to turn a little bit.
Oh yeah. Anybody who's in this business on any aspect of it it deals with deadlines and the pressure of hoping your equipment works.
Yes.
Whether whatever it is. For me, a laptop. You know, when I first started at the Sun, the laptops we used were you could only see about 3 lines of type at a time. So it really made you focus on what you're doing. Just write it. It was hard to go back to the start of your story and sending the story into the computer system. It might be an adventure sometimes. So you had to give yourself some time to finish, and watching the screen and make sure it was going through was sometimes nerve-wracking.
So with that, we've touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of go back to people who want to go into this business. What would be some of the most important qualities that a journalist would have? Obviously going into sports, but maybe just in journalism in general, since that's where your heart has always been in journalism.
Right.
Important qualities that students need to be able to make it successfully in this field.
Well, we mentioned earlier, I think training is important. I think a lot of people will look at, hey, it's great, you're getting to go to all these ball games. Well, and it is. Don't get me wrong. I do enjoy that, but there's a lot more to it in sports journalism than just going to the games. And I think having some professional training is really beneficial to know what you're doing. Like I said, when I first went into journalism, it became a journalism major. I didn't know I was going to go into sports. You know, it kind of found me in a way
Yeah.
because I did have that background. But yeah, I can't stress enough that there's to properly cover it. I think you do need some. You need some training, and reading what other people write, or watching or listening to other people is beneficial as well. I know I've learned so much over the years just reading what other people write, or books, magazines, newspapers, listening to sportscasters. You pick up a lot. You know, I shoot a lot of photos now, and I've been looking at newspaper sports photos for over 50 years. You know, so I don't know that I necessarily have an eye for a photo, but I know what I think looks good, and I think that's been beneficial as well.
Photo storytelling is such, I mean, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but it can also be worth a huge story if you,
Yeah.
you know, and that's what I think is just really, people who have the eye and the quickness to be able to do that, you can tell a story in pictures.
You can, and I wasn't originally a photographer. Obviously, I was a writer,
Yeah.
but I have taken a lot of photos over the years, and I kind of took it on as a challenge when I really, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've started shooting more photos, and looking for that photo and trying to figure out where you can get a photo. I spoke with a student yesterday about shooting baseball, for example, and I kind of gave him my thoughts on where I position myself, different places, say at Tomlinson Stadium, to try to get a photo during the game as the game goes on. And now with working with video somewhat on my phone, I'm also trying to get the best video clip that I can. And that's a challenge too. I'll be the first to tell you I'm learning every day.
Yeah. Well, but really, it's like everyone is learning in this business.
That's right.
And as media continues to develop and all that, we're going to be constantly, learning on the best ways to do it.
Yeah,
so.
education never stops.
Yeah,
You keep learning. You know, I made this point yesterday. When I was here as a student, I took a photography class, and one of the things that I learned to do was develop film in a darkroom. You know,
Yeah.
that technology probably went out in the next 10 or 15 years after I learned it, but it was where obviously I needed to know it at the time, and but that was something I learned. I learned how to make out pages, drawing them up on a dummy sheet, and using a pica pole, a ruler, newspaper ruler, a proportion wheel to figure photo sizes, But things have changed so much over the years, and obviously I've had to learn to do pages on the computer screen. I don't have to design pages right now, but I've done that over the years. So there's a lot of things that you pick up over the years, and you're always learning.
This has been such a fun time. Thank you so much for being here. You're welcome to come back anytime. I really appreciate you being here today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it, Johnathan.
Very good. So that's going to do it for this edition of A-State Connections. I do want to thank my guest, Kevin Turbeville, for joining me here today for this fantastic interview. Also want to thank Instructor of Creative Media Production, Dustin Sullivan, and his amazing students in Video Production 1, who are behind the scenes running the show today. Also thanks to broadcast engineers Timmy Arquette, also Aiden Barber, and graduate assistant Reese Barnett for their help on the show. We'll see you next time, and so long, everyone.